Hello, everyone, and welcome to the DevRelX Summit 2023. And we are really quite proud to say this is the 8th consecutive year we're running the summit. My name is Moskula. I'm the CEO of SlashData, and welcome, and I hope you all enjoy the event today. So who we are and why we are here. So SlashData is a developer-focused research and analyst firm. We help the technology industry understand developers. We answer questions ranging from who and where and how many enterprise cloud developers there are, and things like the perception of developers and how Gen AI will affect their work, and of course, many other questions. The DevRelX community is managed by SlashData, and the DevRelX Summit is run and supported by that community. We are a community at DevRelX of professionals that help, support, and learn from each other in this very dynamic space of developer relations, marketing, and developer product management. So again, welcome, and we're glad to have you here. The theme for this edition today is driving the impact of in the age of AI. Generative AI is definitely here to stay, but it's not news anymore. But we are still learning to navigate it and to take full advantage out of the influx of information tools, and most importantly, optimize how to support our audiences. Today, I can't emphasize how fantastic I can't emphasize enough, how fantastic our speakers are today. I'm quite excited. They will be speaking about content creation, how to use AI today and tomorrow, learnings from building an AI-powered solution for resources and support, and much more. From us at SlashData, the storm that has been Gen AI this year has prompted many new research projects and topics, and you will have that opportunity to get a peek into what will be published from us in the next week during our session on generative AI and how it will shape the future. Before we move forward, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. So if you do not manage to view all the presentations today, rest assured, you will get access to recordings that will be available to you in the next couple of weeks. We will be sharing links to that. We will be informing you on the Slack community or by email. Questions, please feel free to add them directly into the chat or use, again, the DevRelX Summit Slack channel. If you haven't joined that channel, there is going to be a link, or if it's not, it's already there. There we go. To join and introduce yourself to that Slack channel. It's where a lot of us come together and chat from time to time and do that interaction and help each other and get information we also need. Also, don't forget to save the link that we are just now sharing in the chat and take the Developer Program Leaders Survey. This survey helps us shape the findings of our reports, including the Developer Program Leaders Report. We do need your input, and we will share a lot of that key data about the industry back to you, this industry that you are all part of. Okay, I might have gone quite quickly through the intro, but I want to say again, very interested and very excited about the presentations today. I'm going to welcome onto the stage Katherine Miller, Sean Falconer, Leandro Margulis, and Rizel Scarlett for our first panel of the day. And the topic is what it means to be a developer in the Everything GPT era. So if we're ready, I'm going to pass it on to Katherine.
Good morning. Sound good? Everyone can hear me? Awesome. Good morning, good day, good evening, everyone, for wherever you're tuning in from. I am Katie Miller, pronouns are she, her, and I am a developer marketing advisor, currently advising companies such as Data Protocol, which is a new platform for developers and developer relations teams to manage product information and developer support through engaging interactive video content. I am here today with a couple of incredibly fabulous humans, and I will have them introduce themselves momentarily, but just to tee up why we're here today. So everything is abuzz about AI capabilities. And as we were all preparing for this panel, it raised these really fundamental questions about what it means for developers, what it means, what we build, how jobs will change, and what resources we need to make sure the technology and the output are useful and ethical. And I had this all formal introduction, but really the genesis of this email came from being at a developer event this past spring, where there was this flurry of where do we put a GPT sign? Where on these developer demos? And it was this moment of, is there really a there yet for developers? What does this really mean for them? Or is this a hype cycle? It almost felt like that episode of Portlandia. This was kind of like somehow the tech version of putting a bird on it to make it hip. And so I was like, you know what? I think we need to dig into that. And so that is what we are going to do today. I have three fabulous panelists here, really a trifecta of roles at the table, if you will, covering marketing, developer relations, and product. Some of them have done all three. So we're going to start with introductions. And by way of introductions, let us know who you are, why you are awesome, and how AI has actually changed your day-to-day role so far, if at all. And I'm going to go clockwise. And so on my lovely little circle, Rizel, you are first, then Leandro, then Sean. If you want to go in that order, take it away.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Katie. And my name is Rizel. Like she mentioned, I am a developer advocate at a company called TBD. It's owned by Block, and they're like working on decentralized identity. Before that, I used to work at GitHub. And yeah, I am in developer relations, which is like kind of a mixture of like product and engineering and marketing, sometimes depending on the company. And how it's changed my role, like how generative AI has changed my role, is for many different ways. One, in terms of coding, sometimes I have to like quickly do a demo, quickly learn a new framework or language that I'm not necessarily familiar with, or I have to create like a sample application. I know when I joined this new company, they're like, hey, we need to put out some tutorial apps. And I'm like, I'm not familiar with this SDK or whatever, but I was able to use a mixture of GitHub Copilot, a mixture of like ChatGPT plugins to kind of help reestablish or reaffirm that like, yes, I was going in the right direction. Here's what I need to do without hitting up people. Cause oftentimes developer relations is like customer number one. And then other examples of how it's changed my role is like, sometimes even trying to brainstorm like what type of talk do I want to write, or like how do I want to write this essay, not essay, this blog post. I can like kind of go back and forth with ChatGPT and be like, hey, I want to do this type of idea, but I want to make it cute. I want to have a theme. Like the other day I made a talk proposal that has like a Mean Girls theme, and I wasn't really sure which way to go with it, and I just looked at some of its ideas and went back and forth.
That is fantastic. And I very much, anyone who has seen me speak knows I love presenting through pop culture references. So I am here for the Mean Girls presentation. That is fantastic. Thank you. And Leandro, on to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me here. Excited to be part of this conversation. And it's also interesting to see how things are going so fast that when we were starting preparing for this conversation and where things are now, it's been interesting to see how, Rizel mentioned GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot like completely crossed the chasm, right, with over 1 million subscribers. So we're seeing the industry mature very, very quickly. For me, basically, Gen AI has been a great tool that has augmented the kind of work that we can do. But also because I am in identity verification and fraud detection, I deal a lot with regulations and compliance. And so it also brought a lot of questions about IP, how to make sure you're not revealing too much, that you're giving your own company IP. How do you deal with that? The reality is like people are going to use public AIs, right? And it came with it developed the notion of private versus public AIs, an AI trained on your own internal company information versus external, or is it trained on external and only reads your internal things? So there's a whole flurry of things that we need to keep in mind, and developing the frameworks to use that to take advantage of the technology in a safe way.
I love that. And I think that you're given a little bit of a lead for a question that we have coming up. So excited to dig into that more deeply in a couple of minutes. And now on to Sean.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, everyone. My name is Sean Falconer, and I lead marketing and developer relations at a company called Skyflow. We're a data privacy platform. So some of the things that Leandro was just talking about has also been something that's been very much on my mind and that I do a lot of, essentially writing and speaking about. But I think in terms of my I don't know, like history, I guess, with generative AI and sort of everything that's been happening in the space and how it's impacted, my work life and outside of my work life even. Uh, Originally, I felt not that like interested or compelled by it. It felt because I hadn't actually played with ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot at the beginning. I was just like, this is like another, AI cycle that's kind of overhyped. Like I remember when I was in graduate school, I think Microsoft's like Alice came out and people were like, oh my God, like it's gonna, pass the Turing test and all this sort of stuff. And then essentially people went and abused the hell out of it to the point where it was, doing things that were really, really, terrible, and they shut it down. And I've seen these different cycles through my career where, things get sort of overhyped from an AI sense. But people kept telling me to check it out. And then I eventually actually did, start checking, using it and leveraging it. And I was like, oh, wow, this does feel different than I think what we've seen previously. And I think one of the things that's happened for me is it's really got me thinking about AI and machine learning more than I really thought about since I was in graduate school, where I was doing some of that stuff sort of day to day. And I've also started to leverage it a lot for work, where I use it for helping me draft or improve content. Sometimes I do a lot of podcasting, so sometimes helping me, brainstorm around questions and content, or even, drive summaries and things like that. So I've been leveraging it to help me sort of scale beyond myself. And I think that is an area where everybody kind of needs to be thinking about if you're in any of the spaces that potentially is going to be impacted, like from a job perspective. And I'm sure we'll get into some of these things. And the other thing is it's basically dominating all my conversations these days. Like it's hard to have a conversation about technology that doesn't somehow sort of lead to generative AI and LLMs and what are you doing in that space. And there's so many different startups that are now happening in the space. Like a month ago, we had the YC graduates that were doing demo day. And I think of the 200-300 demos, probably 99% of those were all some sort of generative AI play. So it's really starting to dominate the zeitgeist. So it's hard to avoid, even if you wanted to avoid it. So I think it's like a forcing function to think about it deeply.
Absolutely. And I love how you all are just teeing yourselves up so beautifully for the questions you're going to answer later in this. But what you said, Sean, and Rizel, what you said really reminded me. I heard a computational neurobiologist speak earlier in the year. And one of the things that she alluded to is how to think about it as a tool in the toolkit that humans use versus the replacement. And again, we'll get into that a little bit. But that's an interesting tension that I want us to hold as well, especially as we start to think about what role it plays in jobs, or even the relevance and existence of jobs. So we'll get to that utopian versus dystopian question in a little bit. But really starting off, because even in this conversation, we've used a bunch of different words. We've heard generative AI, we've heard AI, we've heard ML, we've heard GPT, and so forth. And earlier in the year, had found a great article that talked about the spectrum of these things, from ML, AI, generative AI, LLM, GPT, and so forth. So just a quick around the horn for the audience listening in, for the companies and roles that you're in right now, where are your companies focused on that continuum? So again, I'll start to hop around a little more after this one, but just for this quick around the horn, we'll do Rizel, Leandro, and Sean again.
Okay, yeah, and I think I will speak from the GitHub perspective, since I just worked there like maybe 2 months ago. But really, the way to think about maybe like GitHub Copilot, because that's where my focus was, is like GitHub Copilot was a tool using OpenAI's GPT, right? So they are using behind the scenes. At first, they were using an LLM called what was it called? Codex. And then they switched over to a different LLM called ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo, because that was giving better results, having less latency, and a whole bunch of other things. So the way I would think of it, right, is an LLM is a large language model. It's like using machine learning, and it's creating generative AI. And the ChatGPT, not ChatGPT, but OpenAI has multiple different types of LLMs, and those might be called like GPT-4, GPT-3, whatever. And when people say GPT, that just stands for generative pre-trained transformer 3 or 4. These are just like different descendants and versions of those LLMs, and they can be used and plugged in to tools like GitHub Copilot. I hope that made sense.
Absolutely made sense. Perfect. Thank you. And Leandro?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I'm in charge of a portfolio of products about how people experience through products from an APIs to SDKs to hosted experiences. And so I'm looking at different ways to leverage AI, but I do think so. But trying to help discern these terms, right? AI has been around for a long time, and it actually has been like over decades, right? But I believe the latest iteration is Gen AI, right? And that's what people now, when people say AI, a lot of people are referring to Gen AI, which is a little bit about what Rizel was talking about. So I am looking at using Gen AI already trained LLM models to interpret data and make it easier for people to interact with that data. That's one of the use cases that I'm looking at. On the other hand, we've been using AI and ML to create trained models that you can authenticate against and those kind of things. I think that that's more like AI ML versus Gen AI and some kind of interface that you can interact with. Hopefully that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And as obvious as it may seem to those of us on the call or those of us listening into the audience, I definitely know in professional context, people are using those words interchangeably. And it is that sense of what, in fact, is it delivering? I remember one of the first things when there was this whole hype cycle, I was like, I was demoing AI APIs back in 2017. Isn't this already a thing? And so really understanding what the step change difference is and really how companies are using it. Because each of these, as you said, Leandro, really can serve a different business purpose, a different user purpose, a different job function purpose. So Sean, you want to bring us home on this question?
Sure. So in terms of the way I think about it, so I think, there's a good point that Leandro made of this is, basically the concepts, a lot of concepts around artificial intelligence or machine learning. And I can get into I think how people think about the differences of those two areas, but they're not new. Like the first paper that talked about neural networks is from 1943. So it's been around for a long time. I think there's been a number of innovations along the way from a technology standpoint that have allowed us to get to the point that we are now. Like when the big thing when it comes to generative AI and in particular LLMs is that you need a lot of data. So 15 years ago, we didn't even have enough data that's been in a digital form that you could use to actually train these types of models. And then the second thing is raw compute power. We didn't have essentially the raw compute resources available to do a lot of this stuff. So for a long time, when it came to sort of the subclass of AI that we would call machine learning, which are more sort of predictive classifiers, categorizations, they've been more statistical based and a little simpler in terms of the raw compute power that you needed, just because we didn't essentially have the available computing resources to do a lot of this stuff that we're doing now in deep learning. So we're using sort of simpler techniques around naive Bayes and k-means clustering and a lot of the stuff that's been around for a long time that we use for spam detection, fraud detection, and so forth. And those are still really valuable techniques and models, but I think the step function has been just the sheer amount of data that's available, as well as the raw compute power that has allowed us to essentially take some of the stuff that and also, I guess I should note that not all LLMs are neural network based. The GPT models are, but then there's another class of LLMs as well. There's basically two classes. There's the ones that are more sort of GPT based, and then there's ones like BERT that are based on predictive model tasks. So there's a lot of nuance that goes on in here, and it gets pretty complicated. I wouldn't say I'm the world's expert in this stuff, but but I know a little bit. And then in terms of my my role at Skyflow and the way we think about all this sort of stuff is really around how do we essentially do and leverage these technologies in a safe way. And there's a lot of challenges, I think, and we'll probably touch on some of the stuff that we have to think through. Like, everybody's super excited about what this can unlock, but we're in a little bit of the Wild West era right now of AI, where I think we're pushing a lot of things to market and trying to get people actually using this stuff without necessarily taking a step back and looking at, is this the right thing to do from where we are in terms of being able to protect, people's privacy, security, toxicity of the models, ethics, and so forth.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way that you've led us to the next point in our conversation here, as well as just from all of you, that real foundational grounding and what we're actually talking about, that we use these terms interoperably in a lot of ways, but they actually mean extraordinarily different things, both in terms of what we're building, for what purpose, and then how people are using them. And getting into that next one, and Leandro, this is a question that I'm going to throw over to you. For thinking about shifts in product, marketing, developer relations strategy, how have you approached moving quickly yet thoughtfully? And this is kind of what Sean had alluded to, which is it feels like the wild, wild west. And really, how have you kept in mind the balance that developers, and kind of bringing it back to being amongst developer relations practitioners and developer program practitioners, how have you kept in mind that balance between devs being excited about innovation and yet very skeptical about longer term adoption of technology that has so many unknowns? So unclear costs, documentation, poor usability, vague sense of what it can actually do right now. Like, any of us who have worked in enterprises, we know that our customers aren't going to put anything into production until they're ready to trust it. So from the from the product perspective, how do you think we're there yet in delivering on the promise of efficiency and productivity, or how have you approached this from a product perspective?
So the short answer to your question would be yes, but it depends on which use case. Thinking from a product perspective, there are certain use cases where we can take certain risk that in other use cases we cannot. Specifically in the environment that I am, right, in identity verification and fraud detection, and working with a lot of PII and certain compliance and regulations, right? So what I've been trying to do is set up the right framework for us to be able to decide where we can take certain risk and be able to use this. So, for example, I do think that there's less risk, and we need to get familiar with these technologies. Everybody needs to, right? From developers to non-developers. There's people that will be implementing this. There's will be people that will be using it. Sometimes it's the same, right? So the same persona, sometimes it's not. So identifying basically low risk, high impact use cases where this can be tried has been interesting. One of the things from developer experience that I think this can help a lot is being able to go through get a model to get access to your API docs, and then be able to prompt that model for questions regarding your API documentation and help you create sample code, those kind of things, to be able to lower the barrier to entry for people to use your products, right? That brings me to another question that we can go into later in terms of inclusion, right, and in lowering access to be able to develop things and create things, and who is a developer moving forward, and how this opens the gates for other people to be able to be creators in that sense. But going back to your question, I think that we can move fast in certain use cases and very slow in others. We just need to identify which use cases we can take some risks to be able to get all of us get familiar with the technology, and be able to refine any kinks that may happen, and for us to feel more comfortable. Perhaps you can do a lot more use cases, but just for an internal audience, if you have a critical mass within your company as well, or with some friendlies versus putting something out in the open. There's a lot of different things there's a lot of different levers that you can play with as you refine your use cases.
Great. And as an add-on question, I'll throw this out. I'll let either Rizel or Sean jump into this one, is thinking about it from that developer relations, developer marketing lens. What are some of the things that you've done to create those lower risk opportunities for customers to explore and try this? And that this actually was I was the API world yesterday, and this was a question that actually came up from one of the attendees who was working in an emergent space and was wondering, how do you help people get over that trust ledge to kind of stay connected to a product? So Rizel, I saw the hand go up, and I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm talking from maybe like a slightly different perspective, not necessarily like with APIs, but I know when I first started at GitHub, GitHub Copilot was new, and there was like a lot of like varying responses. Like I would go on Twitter and some people would be like, this is amazing. And then some people will be like, I really hate GitHub Copilot. It's stealing code, da 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 da. And there was some misconceptions and some truths. And for me, I was like super new, and I was like, okay, I want to know if like the company I'm working at is actually producing this really bad product. So I was like, let me dive in and try it out. And the way that I was able to like build trust is just giving people as many examples as possible on like how to actually use this product, and giving them little tips and tricks, telling them and being honest about where it was weak and where it could be improved. So I'd be like, hey guys, or hey everyone, like GitHub Copilot is using generative AI, which means the output's going to be non-deterministic. You can't always control the output, but here are like some little tips and tricks that you can do to make sure that the results are like guided in a better direction towards you. So I would like do that through blog posts and like conference talks, or even just sitting down with somebody. So like that's like a simple example of how I try to like lower the barrier and like explain things to people. Because although GitHub Copilot is like, I guess, relatively easy to use because you just write a comment, it's not really straightforward because you're like, okay, it should be writing the code that I want it to write for me. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And you said something that even though we're in this incredibly transformative, fast-moving time, it also really gets to the core of the work that we do, and that even if we're moving at a slightly different pace, it doesn't change, which is the core of our work is empathy, and the core of our work is listening, and the core of our work is building trust. And you actually led to the next question, which I'm going to throw over now to Sean, to you, which is and Rizel, you actually said this when you were talking about how you were able to ramp up on your new role, that it was an area that you didn't know a lot about. And we've alluded to how this may change the definition of what a developer is, or who someone is who builds and who writes code. And so, if AI assisted code lowers that barrier, does it change the definition? Or who is a developer, and what does it mean for inclusion of people who are creating within this space? So Sean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. I'll just have one comment on what Rizel was saying.
Go for it.
Beforehand. Like, I think in terms of, like building trust, like one of the things that I have found helpful is to kind of remind people that there's been these, almost every time we introduce some sort of like developer productivity jump, there's always like resistance of either, what does this mean for my job? Like, does this, devalue my skills? Like, there was a time 20 years ago when to move code from staging to production, there was someone who was paid to copy and paste that code from one server to another and manually create a backup. Like that, and eventually we automated that, and it was a good thing, right? And that we didn't need to essentially have somebody, and that person probably like reskilled and did other things. So it's not necessarily like productivity takes away your job or anything like that. And I think that leads us to your question, Katie, around what does this mean to be a developer. So for me, I think engineering is ultimately about solving problems. That's what you get paid for, is not to necessarily write code. Code might be essentially the means with which you solve problems, but the reason you're paid the rather large salaries that we can get paid as software engineers is to solve problems. And I think that's an important thing to remember. And if we can essentially use productivity tools like AI or CI/CD, then it allows us to actually have more time to focus on solving hard problems, and that's a good thing. There are a lot of things that when it comes to coding that aren't necessarily like super high skill things of just like pushing and pulling data, that if you can take that thing away, then that, I feel like that's a good thing, and it allows us to focus on other things. And in terms of essentially having tools that lower the barrier to entry for someone to be able to do some form of coding. I don't necessarily see that as somebody somehow like devaluing what it means to be an engineer or developer. It's like I can go on YouTube and watch a video about, like, I don't know, fixing a leak in my sink, and I do that, it doesn't make me a plumber. Like, it doesn't necessarily remove the value and skill set of a plumber just because I was able to do that simple thing that I learned from YouTube. So I don't think that it's like a danger of somehow like discrediting what we, bring to the industry, or what our, why we spent time, studying, computer science, or however we came to acquire these skills.
And at the same time, though, and I'm going to throw this back out, and then we're going to do another like quick around the horn. We're going to do kind of a thumbs up, thumbs down voting sort of thing quickly. But how do we think it, especially as we're all creating product, program, campaigns targeted to developers? We talked a lot about internally how we've thought about building product, doing our own jobs and things like that. And yet a lot of the work that we do is actually externally focused. And so how do you think about this from an inclusivity perspective? So we know it isn't necessarily going to devalue jobs that we have, although I feel like if you read the media, sometimes they think it might, and they're like, ooh, jobs are going to go away. And yet, how does it actually create more opportunities? So I'm curious if I can throw that out there and see if anyone wants to take that one. Rizel, we'll go Rizel quickly and then Leandro.
I felt bad because Leandro went off mute, but I just am extremely passionate about this topic. I think that the ways that it can like introduce more inclusivity and stuff like that is, I think that products like ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot can provide a sense of like psychological safety. Like my experience when I first started off as a software engineer was like so scary because there's like nobody that looks like me. I don't really like, it's like, for lack of better words, it's like a bunch of like older white men, and I'm like 21, and like it was also like a lot of them might have been a little bit more, I think tech could be a little elitist, so it would be like hard to ask questions. If I've been like researching all day long, I will like ask and be like, hey, can I have some help? And they're like, did you Google it? So that will already like shut down my like confidence, and I'll be like, now I don't want to code. But I think that like having something like GitHub Copilot or ChatGPT, I wish I had that earlier on, where I can like go back and forth and be like, hey, how do I do this? And I can go in more confidently. I can even like, I can still collaborate with my coworkers, but I can go in more confident. How far I got, I know I'm doing the right thing, but I just need like an extra step. So I think in some sense, yes, it can, I guess, like maybe take away jobs, maybe for like folks that are in like the art field or whatever. But I think it can help strengthen folks who are in technical roles, especially if they're like from a more minority like sense. And then also like maybe even from an accessibility point of view, not necessarily like more visible abilities or disabilities, but maybe like non-visible ones, like maybe you have like ADHD or something like that. It can be hard to focus sometimes when you're like coding, and those tools are like something that can help you to be like, all right, I'm going to focus. It kind of makes it a little bit more gamified for you and gives you that like dopamine hit that you need.
I appreciate that thoughtfulness about how it can help in terms of building up that confidence and giving access to that information. I feel like we could have an entirely separate panel about what artificial intelligence and generative AI means for arts and creativity and who identity is. I think if we have time, I think safeguards and ethics is one of the questions at the very end that we can dig into. But before we get to the next question, Leandro, was there anything that you wanted to add to this one?
Yeah, I was just like, I do think, I don't know how, if we can look at jobs, I believe the jobs are going to evolve regardless in the arts as well. I also think that, garbage in, garbage out still applies. So there's a whole new art about how to write the proper prompts to be able to get what you need. So I think that the system thinking that all of us have is super helpful for that, including for artists that may need to convey some kind of image of or emotion, leveraging these kind of tools, right? So I do think that the work is definitely gonna evolve. I also wanted to build on or from what Sean was saying about the reality is that our job is to solve problems. I do think that based on like the role of the developer is evolving. The developer has a lot more influence, decision-making power, and budget now that technology is being sold via SaaS in terms of which tools are being used, choosing the right tools for the job. And I think that's also a lot of value added that a developer can add. But it also goes back to like defining what is core to what you really need to build versus all the other tools that you can use. And I think that we will continuously ask that question to ourselves to understand what is truly core, what is truly unique that we need to build versus what we can leverage for something else.
Got it. I think just as an FYI, I think we lost Rizel for a minute, but she'll join us back as soon as she can. And you said something there that really resonated with me, which is, oh, and we have Rizel back, which is fabulous. Which is, no, it's all good. We're so happy to have you back. Thank you. Which is I'm trying to remember it. The idea that it's a tool and that it isn't just all of a sudden going to make everything perfect. And I'm actually going to, and it leads beautifully into this next question, which is kind of the state in which things are at. And the reason that I think about this is I think about having an argument with a chat bot for the US Postal Service earlier this year, where it's this idea of we don't need customer support anymore because we have these chat bots. And I was like, give me a person. And it took like 15 minutes for it to understand that like their chatbot system could not understand it. Apologies, UPS, US Postal Service. And it kind of, and this goes to the pop culture piece. So Rizel, you teed us up so perfectly with that reference to Mean Girls, is when I think about the future and there was kind of this promise and this scariness, and the two things that came to mind for me. So this is where it's going to be the quick thumbs up, thumbs down, because we have a lot to get to in like 8 minutes, is on one hand was like the dystopic Ilium from Vonnegut's Player Piano. And on the other was like the very utopian, like Plazer 15 from like the last season of The Mandalorian. So if I've lost you all, I apologize. But it was essentially like dystopic, which is like humans have no roles, to utopic, which is like robots and artificial intelligence have replaced everything so that we can live these lives of leisure. So I'm going to do a quick around the horn, which is like where each of you thinks we're falling within that scale. Like if you're like, this is really scary, or this is really promising and hopeful. So Leandro, you're now in my upper right corner. So we're going to go Leandro, Sean, and Rizel with that quick thumbs up, thumbs down vote.
Well, I don't know if I can do a quick thumbs up, thumbs down there, but what I can tell you very quickly is I do believe that, you know, we have had in history a lot of different tools that boost our productivity, and we still tend to work similar amount of hours. Like we just do more, but we also keep busy, right? So I do think that I don't think it's going to be completely utopian or dystopian. I also think that perhaps my definition of utopian will be different. I don't think that Gen AI and robotics will completely replace and then we'll just go to the beach, because I don't think that's who we are as people. I think we'll still be busy working and building new stuff with all these tools augmenting what we can achieve.
That is absolutely fair. So, you know, potential scriptwriter for The Mandalorian here, right here, people. Sean.
Overall, I think it's a positive thing. I think that there is something where, for whatever reason, for things like robotics or AI, there's more of a sort of like concern or negative reaction to it, to these things that like things that we consider like uniquely human. But I think over time we'll just kind of get used to it, and it'll just become the way things work, and we won't even be thinking about it. It's just like we don't think about the fact that we're right now in 4 different locations around the world talking in real time and broadcasting out to everyone. But 20 years ago, that would have been like, you know, like magic essentially. So we take for granted a lot of times the technology that we innovate around, and it just takes some time to kind of get over the original hype cycles to being like, oh, this is the way that things work. And I think I'm in particular really excited about the potential impact, like positive impact that generative AI can have in the world of biotech. There's a lot of really, really amazing work that's going on around drug design right now, and being able to leverage AI technologies to really innovate and speed up the go-to-market of drugs that can really like help people. So that's a very, very exciting space that I think would be pretty much impossible to be able to do the things that they're doing without some of these technologies.
And related, I heard a great piece on public radio this week is how they're thinking about incorporating it into doctors' tools. So particularly doctors that are already overworked, how can they actually get to novel and unique information more quickly for their patients? So, kind of related to that. And Rizel, what do you think? Are we heading towards Ilium, or are we heading towards Plazer 15, or somewhere in the middle?
Okay, I would say I'll try to keep mine short. We're going towards a positive direction, but I think we need to continue to stay intentional and like cautious of how we're building these tools, because sometimes some of the AI tools that people build can affect humanity negatively. So as long as we're being responsible, I think it'll be a positive direction.
Excellent. Leandro, you want to go back to that one?
Just wanted to make a quick comment, since some of us are in identities in one way or the other. I also think that it's contrasting to see how we are evolving in AI, and a lot of wars going on in the world, right? So I think it's important to and how these technologies can help. We need to be careful about what's true, what's not, what's real, what's not, what's a real identity versus not in all this information coming around. And I have hope that these technologies can help us in the positive way to discern and get to the intrinsic value of truth.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It looks like we have about 3 minutes, so I'm going to give each of you one more question, and each of you about a minute to ask that one question before we wrap things up. So Sean, I'm going to go back to you on this one, because you had actually referred to the pitch days for Y Combinator and how 99% of them were coming from this space. And so I'm curious if you think that there's a potential negative impact. And again, with that focus and mindset of not just how we do jobs as developers, but also how we put information out into the world as developer relations practitioners. So do you see a negative impact of this hype train? So this is your, 1 minute question. Go.
Yeah, I think there is potentially a negative impact right now, in particular, because there's so much focus on Gen AI and LLMs that as a company, that as a startup, it makes it harder to get funding if you're not essentially doing something in that space, because everybody, any sort of VC is hyper focused on that, and trying to make sure that they have kind of like skin in the game, that they're going to have a horse in the race, or whatever metaphor you want to use. And I think similarly, we're seeing the same thing with conferences or content, and so, like the ones that are going to get the most views right now, or the most get accepted to conferences as talks, or people have excitement around, are going to lean into things that are related to generative AI. And that creates a lot of noise, that really good work that is not related to generative AI is still going on, but it kind of like gets hidden below this massive amount of content and talks and companies that are doing things specifically around this. So I think it's going to take a little bit of time for that to die down. And we've seen these cycles before with, SOMO local from like 15 years ago, or social search, like all these different things that have happened. And eventually it kind of contracts and things calm down. But I do worry in terms of so much noise, it makes it hard for other people who are doing interesting work to kind of stand out.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Leandro, question for you, since you've talked a lot about identity and safeguarding. So your one final quick question is going to be kind of thoughts, super quick thoughts, and I'm sure you could give an entire, you could give a master course on this, of safeguarding sensitive data and what it means for intellectual property and things like that. So as people are building things or thinking about building things, how to keep that within their frame of reference, and what it means both in terms of building product and doing their work.
I think if we don't understand how the information that you use in a prompt is going to be used or reused or absorbed, we just need to be careful and have some kind of a systematic way of redacting the prompts that we use with certain AIs in terms of public AIs, to be able to be able to craft a good input to get the output that you need without putting your IP at risk. And I think that will be a whole new field that will continue to evolve.
Rizel, I think we ran out of time. I am so sorry, but I think as our friends at Slash Data had teed us up, the conversation doesn't need to end. We have an active channel within Slack. So if there were any questions that we didn't get to for all of you, all of us are in that Slack channel and happy to continue the conversation.
And Rizel, you can always tell us your answer on Slack. We can give you a sec as well here if you want to just finish and close up the chat.
Sounds good. I'm good either way.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Katherine. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Leandro, Sean, and Rizel. This is just one of those topics. There's so much to discuss. Let's pick it up on Slack. Let's continue that discussion. And we'll get into our next session, or it's our lightning talk. So